Yeah, good morning. Sincere condolences to all those people that consider themselves to be diehard Redskin fans. I know it was a disappointing weekend. If you happen to be from Philadelphia or from Pittsburgh, where I'm from, it was a slightly more attractive outcome to the weekend, but I'm sure the Redskins will bounce back next week. I would like to thank Mike Noonan for the warm introduction, and a special thanks to the Foreign Policy Research Institute for the invitation to speak about foreign fighters and their impact, not just on the continent of Africa and its island nations, but also on global security. I also appreciate General Ward's introduction. And as Mike pointed out, General Ward's a great leader, and I think instinctively he knew that I really needed to be here as opposed to back at the Oktoberfest. He didn't really ask me, but nonetheless, I'm here, and I am glad that I am here and have the opportunity to spend the day with you today. Some of you may wonder about our interest in speaking today. The answer is very simple. The U.S. Africa Command is, in the words of its commander, a listening and learning command. We do not know everything, and it is our hope that this forum and continuing contacts with you and your colleagues will help us better understand the complexities of our environment so that we will be more informed, more capable, and more prepared to foster sustained stability and prevent future conflict. I applaud each and every one of you for taking the time to participate. And I also want again to congratulate Mike Noonan, FPRI, and the Retired Officers Association, Reserve Officers Association, for the impressive list of panelists. Individuals who have written extensively on this topic, been on almost every major news channel, advertised most major foreign policy organizations, and testified before Congress, though I have to admit that as an intelligence officer, appearing before Congress is not something that we normally regard as a desirable, positive thing to do. Apologies to any staffers that may be here. I would also like to welcome and recognize any of the foreign attachés, which I think some will participate in the conference before it's over. Their presence and involvement is absolutely critical to help define, to understand, and to challenge those individuals and groups that transit for sovereign countries to spread hate, violence, and death. I'd also like to thank the FPRIs for last year's initial Foreign Fighter Conference that addressed the flow of foreign fighters from the source, transit, and destination countries. This conference looks poised to build on the success of last year's events. I personally see two themes that transcend both sessions. While neither is new, I believe that both topics are useful as backdrops that help frame discussions that we will have over the next couple of days. The first concept is globalization. By definition, as we know, globalization is simply the technologically enabled process of improved communications and transportation that accelerates the movement of goods, people, money, and ideas. For foreign fighters and their associated networks, this means unprecedented access to the internet, cell phones, long-distance satellite communications, and electronic fund transfers. So while the phenomenon of foreign fighters has existed for generations, today's flat world permits fighters to be far more efficient, effective, lethal, and clandestine than their predecessors. Regardless of whether we are talking about radicalization, recruitment, training, travel, operational coordination, or information operations, globalization has changed how foreign fighters' networks operate across the globe. When civil libertarian, technology, and operational concerns are superimposed, you end up with significant challenges to the law enforcement, intelligence, and military communities. The second overarching concept is that for many, foreign fighters see themselves and are perceived by some others as freedom fighters. individuals motivated by ideology, religion, oppression, or social injustice. These individuals who voluntarily forego the comforts and safety of their homes to take up arms to further what they perceived as a noble and a heroic cause. Regardless of whether these fighters are bound by ethnicity, religion, nationalism, or some other common denominator, they generally bring a fervor and enthusiasm to the battlefield that is lacking in mercenaries and local combatants. As we wrestle with the challenges of foreign fighters, we should be mindful of these attributes as we craft anti-recruitment strategies, formulate information operation campaigns, or prepare operational plans to militarily defeat them. Thus, while foreign fighters are not new, the complexity of today's strategic environment, the speed in which information flows, and the perception of Western and U.S. involvement in the Middle East has created a surge in Islamists taking up arms and moving to Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Pakistan, and other places. While those case studies will be the focus of the next day and a half, they are not the only examples, and perhaps others can be explored or discussed. The first panel, today's recent trends in foreign fighters, should be especially useful, sharing analysis on data and trends help make this information more digestible for both the public and policymakers. Decision makers must also fully appreciate the context of the problem in order to produce the most efficient approaches to address them. The right solution to the wrong problem is a recipe for disaster. So is the tendency to craft solutions that treat symptoms without addressing the root causes. Right now, there are still far too many questions regarding foreign fighters. For example, what is it that motivates young men to give up everything to fight in a far-off land? Where and how are foreign fighters recruited? What is the appeal of the message? Are there common trends amongst countries in the same region? What is the nature of the recruitment and facilitation networks? And are the networks based around individuals, locations, or activities? Are they primarily physical or virtual? And do specifics vary by source community or by the ultimate destination country? And once we have developed and implemented solutions to these problems, it is essential that we track the effects of our programs. In an era of diminishing resources, we have to be good stewards and justify our actions. It is, of course, the destination countries, the countries to which foreign fighters flow, that feel the immediate and violent impact of this problem. For example, in Iraq, the post-invasion influx and growing influence of foreign fighters from the Middle East and Africa paralleled the rise of violence that we saw from 2003 through 2008. However, given the experience of the Soviets in Afghanistan, this should not have been a surprise. Moreover, I understand that there are other historical examples that suggest that the military impact of foreign fighters are more significant than their actual numbers would indicate. It should also be interesting to examine the similarities or trends between today's foreign fighters and the Afghan Arabs who returned to their homes after fighting the Soviet army. Returned to homes only to find a world that they could not reconcile with and countries that did not recognize them. In short, can we extrapolate the similarities between the foreign fighters of today with the Afghan Arabs? Somalia, a conference study from Africa's AFRICOM's area of operation, has, according to some reports, over 200 foreign fighters from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen. And this number does not include perhaps another 1,000 ethnic Somalis from Europe, the United States, and Africa. Somalia is a failed state and perhaps the ultimate safe haven for Islamic extremists to train and to gain experience in traditional and asymmetrical warfare. Due to the number and influence of these foreign fighters, Somalia must be a strategic concern for the United States and other countries, given al-Qaeda's goal to reestablish the historic Islamic Caliphate that extends well beyond Somalia and the African continent. When we discuss the source and destination of foreign fighters, we must recognize that the movement of these violent actors can be in both directions. Thus, while we partner with destination countries to increase their military capacity to neutralize foreign fighters, a comprehensive strategy must address the source of the problem. This would include the social, cultural, economic, and political factors that led to their original disillusionment. As a stated tactic of al-Qaeda is to leverage disenfranchised Muslim diasporas around the globe. Another lesson from the Soviet experience in Afghanistan is the legacy of Afghan Arabs, today many of whom occupy senior leadership positions in terrorist organizations. What happens to foreign fighters after the conflict is over? Clearly, there has been an increase, a rise in transnational insurgents who were raised and radicalized in one conflict only to turn up in another. Thus, while this trend enables insurgents to militarily strengthen their ranks through the importation of foot soldiers, it also gives birth to the next generation of terrorist leaders. Not only do second and third generation fighters continue to spread the call of arms against sovereign nations, but increasingly they spread the tactics, the techniques, and procedures of terrorism. The proliferation of these methodologies has been seen in Iraq, Afghanistan, and in Africa. The dichotomy between foreign fighters who are foot soldiers and those who move into leadership positions of what were once national movements, it is, in my mind, particularly interesting. In the case of the recent December 09 Shambo Hotel bombing in Mogadishu, the bomber was a young ethnic Somali who had spent over half of his life in the West. Al-Shabaab had no compunction about using him and other young foreigners as the primary tools of suicide operations. In these cases, foreign fighters were simply expendable cannon fodder to the recruiters, the facilitators, and operational commanders. However, there's also significant anecdotal evidence to suggest that the leadership of Islamic extremists in both Yemen and in Somalia consists of foreigners to include Americans. Apparently, like any successful transnational business, al-Qaeda and al-Shabaab promotes individuals as a consequence of their abilities, unique experiences, and operational achievements. In respect to foreign fighters, when working with partner nations, it is essential to understand a country's specific problems. Does the current and future threats to a country stem from its role as a recruitment mecca, a transportation corridor, a financial hub, or the ultimate destination for a foreign fighter? Of course, some countries fall into more than one category, sometimes simultaneously, at other times sequentially. While the solutions for different countries may be similar, each must be tailored to its unique situation. In all countries, the development of a professional, capable, self-sufficient security service is critical to the long-term success of defending individual state borders and regional coalitions. As Ambassador Huddleston said in her testimony to the African Affairs Subcommittee last December, and I quote, We believe that the long-term solution must be that each nation is capable of governing and controlling its territory with a professional military, accountable to civilian governments that have the support of local populations. If this is not the case, then those who espouse violent extremism and active terrorism, even if temporarily deterred, will return to ungoverned spaces. Countries, to do this, must have both professional and effective security services and the ability and political will to judiciously and wisely employ these forces. However, success also requires regional coordination between stronger and weaker nations to jointly defend common borders and to deny safe havens in which foreign fighters rely. Thus, military cooperation and intelligence sharing is critical, as it can help attack the entire triumvirate: source, transit, and destination countries. Last year's keynote address by Ambassador Daley stressed global partnership and engagements in order to create cooperative and information sharing arrangements. U.S. Africa Command and its partner nations are at the forefront of these activities. Last year, when this conference originally met, Africa Command was evolving from a new organization focused on communicating who we are to a command working to identify what more could we do. That has not changed today. While some continue to see negativity in AFRICOM, the majority properly judge us not only by our words, but more importantly, by our actions. Our engagement network includes enhancing multiple pillars that exist in relatively stable partner nations. These pillars include capable and accountable self-sustaining security forces, effective and legitimate professional security organs, the ability and will to dissuade, defeat current and future transnational threats, and the ability to lead international peacekeeping efforts. We also reinforce the efforts of our government colleagues, such as State and U.S. Agency for International Development, in areas such as good governance, economic growth, and political institutions. For this conference, my remaining remarks will focus on aspects of AFRICOM's theater security program, which, as you would know, is tied to larger national security issues. I've also mentioned Somalia, which is obviously a concern, but is exemplified by our final session today, which is focused on the Maghreb. There are other places that are touched by this phenomenon as well. Regardless of the country, AFRICOM has focused on helping African nations build the capacity required to implement their security sector challenges, implement solutions to their security sector challenges. As General Ward has said, this requires capable, legitimate, and self-sustaining forces with the will to dissuade terror and defeat transnational threats. Of course, the U.S. is not alone in our efforts to support the development of African states' security capacities. One timely example is the cooperation of another Western government, that would be France. Press reporting over the last couple of months has highlighted France's role in assisting Mauritania and perhaps Algeria and others in operations against Al-Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb, or AQIM. A recent example of African countries working together to develop their own regional security capacity is establishment of a joint special military center in Terrance, Algeria. Under their own auspices, Algeria, Mauritania, Mali, and Niger are seeking to create an anti-AQIM cooperation center which will partner with Libya, Burkina Faso, and Chad. I believe that this is what General Ward was referring to when he spoke to Congress last March, suggesting that the United States Africa Command's programs and activities are intended to promote regional cooperation, shared situational awareness, and interoperability. As you know, Terrance sits aside a historical trans-Saharan trade route that is used for illegal smuggling activities. This also suggests an interesting nexus between the illegal trade and the facilitation networks that transport foreign fighters. The Trans-Sahel Counterterrorism Partnership, or TCP, is a major U.S. government effort at building capacity and providing security assistance. Well, TSCTP is clearly aimed at counterterrorism. Its regional approach currently includes the transnational networks that are critical to foreign fighter flows. TSCTP also includes an interagency effort that leverages the expertise of the Departments of State, Defense, Treasury, and Justice. The military component of this partnership is Operation Enduring Freedom, Trans-Sahel, or OEF-TS. It is an example of the regional cooperation that AFRICOM promotes, and as many of you are probably aware, much of the engagement activities that make up this effort are executed by small teams, and they include planning assistance, training, education, and senior leader engagements that help build mill-to-mill and regional cooperations. The demonstrated will of Africans to conduct counterterrorist operations is key to improve border and aviation security and to deny freedom of movement to foreign fighter facilitation networks in ungoverned areas. Extending security beyond the borders of any one country is essential to the security and the stability of other countries. These activities emphasize the desire of AFRICOM to promote and to partner with by and through local partners, local African countries, and regional alliances. These efforts also include countering the ideology, the propaganda attributed to terrorists. In Somalia, there are reports that the radicalization of al-Shabaab's leadership has reinvigorated the organization. Critical to this movement are the foreign jihadi radicals within the inner circle of al-Shabaab's leadership. According to a Somali analyst in Nairobi, the foreign jihadists were once in the shadows, but now there's no doubt that they have taken control of the movement in Somalia. Interestingly, this tendency to counter Somalia's traditionally clan-first culture and more moderate form of Islam historically practiced there. Ample reporting also indicates that most Somalians are rather xenophobic, and a prime motivator in recent fighting has been the desire to rid Somalia of any foreign influence. Witness the recent Ethiopian operations, which was opposed by virtually all segments of Somalia society. Given that reality, why would several hundred foreign fighters be drawn to a conflict in which their presence, assuming that they're not ethnic Somalis, would be an anathema to the very people that they are there to assist? One might speculate that some, but certainly not all, must be drawn to the pan-Islamic extremist ideology of al-Qaeda and the desire to capitalize on a local insurgency and co-opt its leadership to further global AQ goals. I'll leave that question to the experts in this room, but this apparent dichotomy between the presence in Somalia of a significant and influential foreign fighter community whose goals and values are different from that of the average Somali suggests an information seam that we have yet failed to exploit. Africa Command's Intelligence and Security Cooperation Engagement, or ISCE program, is nested within and seeks to contribute to the command's overall theater cooperation objectives, including capacity building, regional cooperation, and intelligence exchanges. Historically, as most of you know, Africa's intelligence services have not always played constructive roles in their countries. Therefore, our efforts are to develop professional military intelligence organizations designed to support army or military operations, vice to suppress the opposition. Respect for human rights, the rule of law, and and subordination to civilian leadership are always stressed. Over the last 2 years, we have sponsored 4 basic military intelligence courses for Africa. These courses last 12 weeks, and they have been hosted in Mali twice, Nigeria, and Senegal. They've included students from North Africa and the Sahel, as well as the U.S. Next class is scheduled in December in Germany. We also offer a 6-week advanced officers course, and this fall we anticipate hosting the first NCO Africa course for members of the North African community as well, OEFTS countries. We also offer a variety of week-long seminars on topics such as advanced analysis and the intelligence cycle. This year, we will host over 50 events, totaling over 1,500 students from 30-plus countries. Building on a UCOM initiative, about every 9 months, I host the senior intelligence officers from the 10 TSCTP countries for a 2-day conference that alternates between Africa and Europe. We will host the next conference in December in Stuttgart. These conferences are critical as they help enhance a better understanding of what intelligence can and should do while providing better situational awareness of regional security challenges. But probably most importantly, they have contributed to the growth of strong personal bonds and permitted participants to understand regional problems from the perspective of their neighbors. Since 2005, the Flintlock exercises have been a practical example of the mill-to-mill regional cooperation taking place in the Sahel. As you know, Flintlock is a Special Operations Forces Trans-Sahel exercise focused on military interoperability and capacity building. There's also been a great deal of discussion about the support that Africa Command has provided to Ugandan and Burundian forces operating as part of Amazon in Somalia. Clearly, this is a priority national security area, as evidenced by President Obama's executive order issued this past April, which targeted the financial asset that's supporting al-Shabaab. Why? Because they, quote, constitute an unusual and an extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States. Failure to adequately disrupt these networks puts Africa Command's partners, as well as the U.S., in my opinion, at risk. In conclusion, I look forward to the conference updates on foreign fighters in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, and Iraq, as well as a discussion of the trends, especially in AFRICOM's area of operations. These case studies should enable us to be more proactive in our analysis and more predictive in our problem solving. In conclusion, this conference has the potential to ultimately assist the U.S. and partner nations, policymakers, military leaders, and the like to stop the flow of foreign fighters, or at least to reduce it. Collectively, if we're able to do so, we can positively impact or deter insurgencies and conflicts from the Middle East through Africa. Conversely, if we collectively fail to address the foreign fighter phenomenon, both its root causes and its impact upon the origin, transit, and destination countries, we run the risk that local conflicts will intensify and expand. Expand fueled by increasing numbers of foreign fighters. As we know, many of these foreign fighters are not interested in local solutions to local problems, but are focused more on furthering a worldwide violent extremist jihadist philosophy. Ultimately, it is our choice as to what to do about these problems. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be glad to take a question or two if we have time to do so.
We do. We have about 12 minutes or so for Q&A. So if you have a question, I believe there's a microphone in the back. I'm not sure how accessible that is, but I'll just say this for one time for the conference. FPRI follows basically the Jeopardy rule, and that please make your speeches in the form of a question. With that, do you
Please.
have any questions? Sir?
Jen.
Can everyone hear me from here, or? Okay, let me just stand here rather than go to the microphone. You indicated that AFRICOM had hosted 4 12-week intelligence conferences for Africans. All 4 seem to be in the Sahel or West Africa. Arguably, the greater terrorism problem is East Africa and the Horn. Any reason why you haven't had these conferences for people from that area?
Yes, there's a reason. And first of all, they really were more courses. Fundamental to trying to develop professional military intelligence capability is to provide baseline, if you will, instruction. And so that's what these 12-week courses are designed to do. The advanced courses add to that as well. We recognize precisely the point that you're mentioning, that we cannot focus only on one region. The East, for example, needs a lot of our assistance, and we are focused on that. We are more driven, however, by in terms of funding and where we get funding from. That is a principal consideration in terms of where we can do this. So we've had more luck in obtaining funding for OEFTS. Ergo, we've been able to do more, but we're really focused on if you will, throughout all of Africa. We recognize that. Mike.
We do need you to go to the mic.
Would you say the threat, though, is more prominent in West Africa, or is it more prominent in East Africa? Just to follow up on that question.
Yeah, I mean, I've sat through a number of discussions in which it's been very interesting as people discuss that. I think probably the threat into East Africa, probably in my judgment, is probably the more important one today. Not to suggest that the one in North Africa and the Sahel is not, and I think you can make an argument that it is equally or even greater. But in my judgment, I think East Africa is probably our bigger problem with Somalia.
As we work our way through a lot of the issues in Africa, I think AFRICOM was designed to be more of a assistance and civilian oriented as opposed to more military, and involve other agencies within the U.S. government. How are we making progress in that arena? I know we're having some difficulty with that same thing as we work our way out of Iraq and as we work our way into Afghanistan with an exit strategy, which suggests that we'll help them work with democracy as well as farming and the other issues as we move the combat forces out. Are we making any progress in that arena down in Africa?
I do think we are. I mean, I think some people referred to AFRICOM as a COCOM plus. As the general pointed out, I think that it reflects the much broader focus of what we're doing. As all of you know, our principal mission is sustained security engagement. Preparing to execute combat operations is not our first, second, or third priority. It is, in fact, building professional militaries capable of providing for their own security within Africa. And I think through the interagency effort that we have with our colleagues back here in the D.C. arena, but also the folks that are assigned to AFRICOM from state, from Treasury, from Justice, from the intelligence community, I think we're beginning to, if you will, understand precisely, or at least understand better how to go about doing that. So I do think we are making progress. Innovative, it's different, but I think we are making progress.
We have a question from the web audience. J.M. Berger asks, what is the impact, numerical and otherwise, of American citizen foreign fighters in Somalia relative to other nationalities?
By the impact, I know it's not your question. A lot of them have, by our judgment, have risen to fairly senior leadership positions. All of us, of course, as I mentioned in my remarks, have a concern about which way the foreign fighters flow, where they will flow back in the United States. As you know, that there's been a fairly effective brochure published recently called Inspire that really speaks to the Somali American community in the U.S. Using, if you will, philosophies and pitches that appeal to that. And so I think they played a major role in what goes on in East Africa today. And I think it's a trend that we need to watch and be concerned about for the future. Sir.
You
didn't mention Europe in any way. What's the relationship of AFRICOM with our European allies in West Africa, where they have, particularly the French, have long experience?
Yeah, I think to the question earlier of East or North, most concerned East Africa or North Africa, if you're European, I think you're probably more concerned about North Africa. And so we do have, at least from the intelligence standpoint and broader as well, we have engagements with traditional NATO allies, particularly with the French and with the British, in terms of trying to understand what the trends are and trying to cooperate and coordinate our efforts in Africa with them.
You mentioned that the Ethiopian incursion into Somalia was opposed by virtually all segments of Somali society. That incursion was widely reported to be enabled and supported by US Special Operations Forces. Did that opposition from Somali society, as you put it, virtually all segments, was that predicted by US intelligence, or did that come as a surprise to you once US and Ethiopian forces went in?
I'll defer only by saying that I wasn't present when so I didn't participate in any of the discussions, nor did I look at any of the studies. But I honestly do believe that for most casual, even the most casual observers, they probably should have recognized that they would not be welcomed as liberators. The experience of Somalia back to our Black Hawk Down and all the rest have suggested just the opposite. So I think it had to be a planning factor, and I'm sure the Ethiopians had to make the calculus in mind when they intervened.
Don, do we have any more web questions?
No.
Anyone else? Well, join me in thanking Mr. Ford for his remarks today. Very much
Thank you very much.
appreciated.